welcome so much to our 7th CSR Weekly today. Today we would like to dive a little bit into technology for CSR. And we would like to understand a bit better, how can technology help us achieve our CSR goals? And specifically, we would like to know what digital solutions are out there, how do they work, and maybe how are they different, and what challenges they are trying to help us solve, which is probably the most important question. And we're very lucky that we have our an expert today with us, Tobias Streich from Transparency One. Welcome, Tobias, to the show.
Thank you very much. Looking forward for the conversation.
Maybe you let us know a little bit how you got into that role that you're in right now.
Sure, more than happy, more than happy. As so many times in life, probably good or bad luck, or just being at the right spot at the right moment. But if I look a little bit back around my career, I certainly do not have any kind of IT background. It's the farthest thing I can think of. So I don't really know how to configure any system or what it all means. But when I started my career long time ago, I always had the wish to work in anything related to sustainability. Just that at the time, that was really an absolutely niche area with no real jobs available. So reality brought me into different angles. I'm working as a credit analyst for larger banks, which was, let's say, more common at these days. Then I shifted to work for organizations with a few steps that took care of suppliers, due diligence process of suppliers around 10 years ago, which was really, let's say, the first element from reviewing financial data towards reviewing compliance data of suppliers. And the one specific organization I worked for at the time had a new concept that they wanted to launch to the market, which was supply chain transparency as the new big thing to come at the time. So we piloted with a few customers, literally a group of people with their phones, with Excel spreadsheets, trying to find out what is beyond the direct suppliers, going into deep, what can be done, develop a first system for it. Learn from big organizations how they struggle with integrating this data because their organizations are not meant to manage multi-tier supply chains. And that is basically a way how I became kind of dedicated to the topic sustainability in supply chains for direct and multi-tier supply chains, and led me to the position where I'm now. I'm very happy that working in that role for Transparency One since more or less day one of the organization, and in my position, let's say, designing these concepts for our customers, what to look after, where to go deep, where to remain a little bit shallow, what kind of information to chase for, and how to implement that into the larger scope of a big organization, into procurement processes, all these type of areas.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much for this little journey.
Sure.
I mean, there's lots of technology out there. And while I was researching a little bit, I clustered it kind of in the audit. So there's technology for audit management, maybe like SEDEX, the platform. Also, Amphori offers a platform to manage audits and CATs. So the different ones for the audit management. Then I found some for more risk assessments, like Echovardis, and also supply chain assessments that maybe Transparency One goes more into it. Then there's also reporting, technology for reporting. So there's all these kinds of technologies, which made me realize, yeah, they're probably, so there's probably not one technology for CSR. So that was one conclusion that I had. And then probably they're all trying to solve different challenges. Maybe you can lead us a little bit through the main challenges that we're facing and we're trying to solve.
Right. No, I think you summarized that very nicely. So what we usually see in an organization, you have, let's say, the three elements of capturing data about sustainability. One is about your own organization. One is about your supply chain partners, potentially also the impact of your products once you sell them. And then the third one is, let's say, the reporting needs, which comes, let's say, that lead into the creation of sustainability reports, which is sometimes mixed up with the former ones. But it's really these three dimensions. So data about yourself, help you to understand where you stand, how you can improve. Data about your suppliers, potentially sub-suppliers, where do you stand, how can you improve? And then what you need in terms of reporting mechanisms out of it. It comes down to 2 or 3 main factors that are really repetitive all over the time. The first one is that let's assume the standard is that an organization is working with an Excel approach or a manual approach, chasing data by email, consolidating it into an Excel. It works until a certain scope, depending on the amount of data that you collect, the amount of data points that you collect information about, it becomes very, very complex. So let's assume you do it for 10 suppliers and you chase on 3 different KPIs. That's absolutely doable. If we speak about 1,000 suppliers and 10 different data points, it becomes more complex. So it's really about the administration element of it. And I think it goes one step beyond there also. And specifically, if it is not only sustainability that is in view, but when companies want to have a more of a holistic picture. Because in the past, we see many times that a sustainability manager is responsible for collecting, let's say, data on environmental, data on social aspects. And the quality manager is chasing for a complete different data set from the same supplier. And the procurement manager is chasing for another data set from the same supplier. And this data is in-house. It's there, maybe in good quality, maybe in bad quality, but it's there. But it's not seen as a holistic element. And that again is where, let's say, an Excel approach is probably not suitable anymore. So it's really, let's say, to identify that level when, let's say, Excel is becoming more of a problem than being helpful, simply when it reaches its natural borders. The second element is about harvesting the data, using the data. So we get the feedback when we interview our customers that, for example, let's say audit results are there en masse. They have hundreds of audit reports, but it's not really used as it could be used. And the main reason for that is literally visualization of the information. So if I see lights, icons, bubbles on a nice screen, it's so much easier for every user to work with that data, to identify what really is critical, where do I need to jump into action, where do I not, also to sell the data internally. Here, my procurement colleague, have a look. That is what I mean specifically. Here is where we need to focus on. So it's about that element to change from I do have data towards I can make use of data, where any kind of software solution really helps or can help. And the third element is contextualization. With contextualization, we mean if I'm as let's say as a sourcing manager for responsible sourcing, I collect, let's say, audit reports on social for 100 suppliers. I might not have the power or the mandate to really correct them. What do I need to do is, or at least that's what we learn from our clients, is I'll need to be able to say, listen, these 10 suppliers are responsible for this business line, for this set of products. And that is, well, you, product owner, product line owner, business unit line owner, you need to work with me on getting this done. So visualization, contextualization for the needs of the internal organization, depending on how that organization is structured. Could be by commodity managers, could be by business line managers, could be by country managers, managers responsible for a plant, all supply chains that are related to one key customer, for example, that I sell to. So it's that breakdown into the data that again helps to get the drive and the ownership internally, that the data is understood and somebody feels responsible for it. So these are really the main aspects where we believe that technology can help. And maybe the last element, what we have heard also many times, is just the time from data collection towards data use. So if I can give you the example of an audit, we do have clients who still approach audits with pen and paper on site, at a site. They create their audit on pen and paper, let's say over 2 or 3 days. By the end of the week, they go back to their hotel, they write down the report, they type it into an Excel spreadsheet, they send it to somebody internally who receives it, who validates it, who puts it into a kind of system. So there is easily 2 weeks bygone until the data reaches its first moment of somebody doing actually something with it, or further processing it, or digesting it. And the same accounts for every data that I collect by email, for example, taking into consideration the time I need to go back to the supplier because the data was not exactly what I was asking for. And so it's a reduction in time, simply, efficiency, if I could so say.
Okay, great. Yeah, there was a lot of points. So I think you convinced me that technology can have definitely a big effect on speed, on making use of the data. So simplifying the data and extracting the information that is important for me to then act. Veronica.
I really like it, the idea of contextualization, because indeed, what you mentioned is totally true, that very often companies have the procurement guys looking for something, the CSR looking for something else, working in parallel, and not even knowing what is the context to really make impact, which is all what we are trying to achieve. So that point really made me thought that is a good solution or a good support for companies.
Yeah, the holistic approach, right? Also bringing the teams together and part as well. What would you recommend for company before they look into tools? Because there's lots of tools and everybody has their little, USP or focus point. What should they think about before going? What should they prepare before they go look for a tool?
Actually, if you allow, that is the only point where I would really like to use one slide, which might be helpful for this, which is basically a slide that we use for initial workshops in this style with our customers to help them identify what they actually need and where they stand. Really, really quickly, and without spending too much time on this. When we start the initial conversations with our clients, usually it's about the, let's say, the holistic triangle, as we have mentioned at the beginning. Ensure that from the beginning we speak with sourcing, with quality, and with sustainability, never with sustainability as a standalone element within the organization. So we really try to help to bridge that situation in companies. And then we'll have a first look at what is already happening by today. Basically, who is collecting what type of information in which way. And then we look about, probably every company has a feeling where they would like to be, what they feel they should have monitoring in a better way, but for one reason or the other, they can't really do it by today. So that's what we call the new areas of information. Many times it's related to multi-tier supply chains. Many times it's related to a more let's say, professional veil of sustainability data beyond what they collect by today in it. And then from here, we guide, this is a simplified way to look at it, but we try to help the customer think about himself and basically, and to define a few initial questions, which will then lead to the answer about actually, do you need an IT system and what kind of IT system could that be? And we will ask our customers to be very, very honest in this. And that's also why we include not only sustainability people who sometimes might be too enthusiastic about it. And in the mix with procurement people, it usually turns out to be a good balance, let's say, between what is really doable in an organization. So the first question is really, what should this system, let's say, be able to provide? Is it really just about compliance elements? I'll need to do it. I'll need to ensure that I have some information into place. Or is the purpose really to drive change in my supply chain? These are two very different perspectives. Again, there might be areas and areas in an organization, and there is no right or wrong, but companies should be honest about what is really, let's say, the main driver in my organization today. Is it about, let's say, regulatory compliance or my own ethical standard compliance? Or do I want to really identify how I can improve year by year? Literally me, myself, being on the ground with suppliers and drive change. So that's one of the key questions. And then the other is, of course, where in my organization with, let's say, with whatever I produce or service I provide, where do I want to focus, or where do I see the highest risks in it? Is it at a supplier level? Is it a factory level further down in the supply chain? If we speak about fashion, is it really the product that brings most of it? And for that reason, where do I want to focus? I believe most organizations by today, they have set their internal goals already. They have said, for example, these are the 10 highest raw material commodities we want to focus on. Or I'm very dedicated to carbon emissions, or I'm very dedicated to child labor, depending on what I do in my supply chain. And then, of course, the question is, if, for example, I say child labor is something I really want to make sure that in my supply chain, child labor is not appearing, how do I measure it? How do I measure it today, beyond on just running audits, as an example? So how can I set up KPIs that I can monitor on a monthly, on a yearly basis, that help me understand where I go? Then we have some other elements. How important is it for me to cover, for example, 100% or 80% or 60% of my suppliers? So the question is, if I send out a questionnaire, if I check for certifications, if I check for responses, how much do I care, let's say, about how many of them do respond? Does it make a difference to me if 40% respond or 95% respond to my request for information? And that, of course, influences a little bit on the left. In order to be compliant for my ISO 9001 requirements, to be honest, it might be good enough that 50% of suppliers are kind of responsive and I have evidence that I have a system to monitor them. If I want to drive real change, probably the suppliers who are not responding are the more interesting ones. So it helps me to really understand it. The second question is, how much do I care about the data quality that comes back? Again, the question is on the left. Where do I really want to be? Can I live with that some, let's say, responses from a supplier are more or less accurate? And how much does that matter to me? Who's working with the data? What will happen afterwards with the data? And the third question is, how much do I care, and how can I tackle the topic of data actuality? Jesus, complicated word. That data is not expired. Whatever data point I collect, it usually expires between 1 to 3 years. That is very easy on certifications. That is kind of a given. But even responses from a questionnaire, soft responses from an audit report, after a certain time of period, you need to consider them not being accurate anymore, just because they are old. So again, the question is, does that matter to you for your purposes? And how do you tackle these today? How do you want to tackle this in the future? And all of these points influence the solution that you might be looking for afterwards, once you answer them. The story continues a little bit. Of course, everybody starts with what he's doing by today, and maybe the next step tomorrow. But what happens after tomorrow? We believe that in almost no company anybody chooses a system today and then changes the system in 3 years, when even so reality has adopted, just because every system implementation is a bit painful. It costs energy. It's a long process in organizations to replace something old with something new. And So we motivate our customers to really think about the next 10 years, or at least 5 years. 10 years is maybe too complex for most organizations nowadays, but at least the next 5 years. Where do you want to be in the future? Will multi-tier supply chains become a significant focus for you because it's natural, it's where the business is going to be? Has your company made commitments in that area? Maybe. And then the other question always is, for whatever you have agreed on upfront, do you really need a tool standalone for sustainability? Or do you need a tool who is literally integrated with all of the existing IT architecture of your organization? So that can, let's say, take data, for example, from an SAP system about suppliers and push back data into an SAP system, for example, about a compliance status of a supplier or from others. And again, all of these questions lead to the question, what kind of system am I looking for? And then there's a few more facts which are, let's say, which are surrounding it. And these are really just 2 examples where we kind of stress our customers to think about. If we think about data quality, sure, any kind of IT system can help, but there is still a human element. If I don't chase my suppliers, if I don't correct the data and ask for corrections, the data will remain wrong or poor quality. So do you want to do that supporting work in-house, or do you want to have it done by an external party? There's multiple of parties, let's say, who focus on that as a supporting service, as a service functionality, basically, to chase and verify the information. We see, for example, that if supply chains are very strong in China or in Russia, as an example, the technology might be different, simply because you have regulations in the country, you have IT restrictions in the country. For example, into China, you can just not send a link to a person in China so that he can access it. There's a Chinese firewall, which might give you complications. So if China for you is crucial as a country, you might want to have a look at the right concept. And again, the same about the culture here. If I raise the same 2 questions to a Swiss and to a Chinese supplier, I can guarantee you that the responses will look very different into it. So how is this a system able, let's say, to reflect the culture of, not of every country possible, but at least of culturally very difficult or very different countries, if they are significant to you? And the last question is, again, who will actually need to work with the data? Is it only you as a sustainability manager? Or are there other people who will need to work with the data? Do you expect that your procurement colleagues will need to use some of the data because they are progressing in their role? They're taking more ownership about responsible sourcing. And for that reason, they need to have at least part of the knowledge of what you as a sustainability manager have in order to because it's going to be part of their daily business in the future. And let's say the last question to it, whatever data we collect here, what will it impact internally? What do we mean by that is, will it automatically feed a scorecard, for example, of a supplier? Will it automatically block a supplier if some red lights appear? So what will really be influenced internally? And that leads again to the question of interconnectivity and what kind of user profiles should use this solution. So that's really the set of data, or the set of questions that we address with customers in order to help them identify, do they need a system, and what kind of system or what kind of systems could be helpful to them in the beginning.
In what case would you say they don't need a system?
It's a bit difficult to say upfront, but certainly, let's say if the compliance target is literally only backup and the organization by itself is relatively small, at least small in terms of supplier base, then we believe a system might not be needed, or a very simplistic solution could be used.
Yeah.
Simply because there won't be any kind of internal drive to really support a larger engagement that every kind of system brings with it. So I think the initial question, is it really just for internal backup, or is it for driving change in the supply chain, makes a huge difference to whatever happens next in it.
Yeah, I understood this also as your central question, probably to think about as a company. Yeah, basically, again, it goes down to the goals, right? We've been speaking a lot about goals and targets, and vision and mission of a company, and if that is to go forward. And I think also your solution focuses a lot on this multi-tier supply chain. So basically, when you want to go deep and when you want to understand really what's happening, then you need a tool, basically, because by hand, let's be honest, it's not possible. If you say, it's enough to work with first tier suppliers or small range of suppliers, and if you're not so ambitious yet, then maybe it's not needed to have a big tool in place.
Yeah. I could imagine that for many companies sourcing locally, and as you said, with a small supply chain that is not complex, you can keep doing it with an Excel.
Right.
However, my question was, how do you see, for example, now the mandatory due diligence law coming? Do you see an impact in this? Because somehow it's a mixture of the two, it's legislation and also driving change.
Right. So we can compare a little bit to the different due diligence laws in other countries and what has happened once they were implemented. Let's say the active laws in France, the UK Modern Slavery Act, the US regulations, the Netherlands, Australia, and what we have received as a reaction from customers, from organizations coming to us, how discussions have changed over this. So the legislations in France and in UK, for example, are, as probably most of the audience will know, are very, very soft regulations. I mean, it's literally more a call for do something and speak about it, but it's not a clear punishment. There's no clear expectations what needs to be done or what is wrong or what is right. However, what really stakes out from there is that it increases the level of companies that want to have some kind of legal backup implemented without really a full support and drive. So let's say a kind of easy and cheap solution to be at least at a minimum level on interacting. And that, of course, is also positive because it creates awareness, and it might be a first step. And before a mentality change is acting, and even the only question that you ask your suppliers and create some awareness is already a good step, of course. Mm-hmm. However, we do see that it increases significantly the number of organizations that take the opportunity, understand the situation, and want to take ownership. So we noticed that based on this legislation, simply it rings bells within the management organizations of companies. And let's say the higher percentage of companies that really want to step to action said, okay, enough is enough. Let's don't wait for the law. We will be proactive. We start our approaches. Is increasing significantly in this. So it's really, let's say, driving is, let's say, a mentality change. And on the other side, we can also share that, as some of you might know, the US Americans have been very strict with some regulations over the last weeks and months for shipments coming under the risk of having been, let's say, produced with forced labor in China, where again, the nature of the law might not be as ethical as it would hope for, because it's part of, let's say, of a more political discussion. But on the other side, the situation in China is real. I think nobody can deny it, and in certain regions. And with the first shipments as ports withheld, not being let into the country, we notice now that there is a real financial impact on some organization. What kind of storm that is really raising up. So the movement, the energy that is generating about companies saying, okay, we need to act, we need to do something. It's so much quicker, it's so much faster. even so, the financial impact might even not that big, might even be not that big for a single shipment being stopped. So the legislation is absolutely helping. It's really a game changer, whatever the legislation is looking like.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Thanks for your insights. Maybe we have one last question, because we are already pretty much into the talk. A lot of people listening, I think they know Echovardis as a tool. Maybe you can speak a little bit about Echovardis and Transparency One, for instance. What are the difference? How do they work? Yeah, just a short explanation on that would be great.
Sure. So first of all, I've never been using Echovardis myself. So I'm not an active user of Echovardis. So it's a little bit difficult for me, let's say, to give insights. But we do, let's say, look at Echovardis as many other organizations on the market to understand what, let's say, what profile, what angle often sustainability assessment of my suppliers they perform and they execute, and what is their value proposition. And indeed, in our scope, most of our customers also use Echovardis as an example. So we had the need to deep dive into it. So Echovardis has been, let's say, one of the force runners, of course. They have, let's say, been one of the enablers to turn something which has been done more in homeworks by individual persons, reviewing data, into a more, let's say, systematic approach, creating a standard frame where companies can benchmark themselves, get an external, let's say, review of their policies, of their standards, of their best practices around sustainability. And for that reason, they get, let's say, kind of a mirror. Here is where you stand compared to your peers. Here is where you have areas for improvement. And we suggest that you work on it, you come back maybe next year, and we review your progress that you have been made. So we believe in that sense, Echovardis has moved a lot in terms of standardization, of helping companies really mature about the basics, about the foundations in an organization. And that fact is very much appreciated by our customers that work with Echovardis as well. Where we come into the game is basically the elements that you, Federica, has been mentioning at the very beginning. A complete picture of a sustainability does not stop at the, let's say, at a rating of policies, of best practices, of standards. The addition to is on-site visits of a factory, literally working with its the suppliers of that supplier, how they really look like, what's going on, what's the impact of my product in a production cycle, how do they deal with wastewater, literally, and measuring volumes, the contextualization into my own business units, all these kinds of elements. So in that context, Echovardis, as many others, for us is one extremely relevant data point to create a holistic picture about a supplier. However, we also respect, and I think it's great for many companies starting that journey. It's a very comfortable way because they can accept given standards, because they can, let's say, get access to most likely a certain set of suppliers already assessed that they don't need to do by themselves, at least to a certain level of my supply chain, whatever that percentage then is. The more mature customers, they often come back to us after a certain stage, basically asking, what do we do with the ones who are not assessed by Echovardis? And what do we, let's say, in addition around the areas of what Echovardis has assessed, how can we, let's say, monitor these elements in the supply chain? So that is, let's say, a typical example around it, and where we maybe enrich both of our solutions into each other. And then we consider that on the sustainability market, there is probably 10 solutions outside there who can be helpful. So there might be 10 relevant solutions which help you on your internal reporting for GI purposes and different. And again, I think it's not really our position to recommend any of these. Probably every one of them has their strengths and their weaknesses on there. From
what I understand, your platform is more like this holistic view. So for companies that want to get a lot of different data and use it for themselves, the supply chain, maybe for the consumer as well. So it's kind of a big solution, which fits maybe also, I mean, I'm just speaking now, but in my head, maybe for, as you say, more mature companies. And then maybe other softwares that I've seen. There's, for instance, one also climate focused software. So just focusing on emissions, recording, reducing, offsetting. There's audit. So depending on your goals and you said your vision, I guess companies can choose the right fit for them.
Indeed.
Yeah, but thanks so much for your insights. It was very interesting.
Sure,
Yeah,
my
thank you very
pleasure.
much.
To get to know a little bit more about this. And yeah, maybe we continue the conversation because I feel like there's lots to talk about. As a first introduction into tools, I think it was great. And yeah, thanks so much.
My pleasure. Veronica, Federica, thank you very much for your time and for inviting me, and have a beautiful day.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.